Welcome, everyone. This is Catherine Pierce. I'm Chief Operating Officer for the NTG. And joining me today is my good colleague, Helen Stepawani. Helen is Project Manager for the NTG's Guide project, which is formally called Changing Thinking. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute and how we hope we can be a resource for you. But while I'm going through just a couple of housekeeping items, I would love it if you would just take a minute. The poll should be appearing on your screen. And we have a few questions that we'd like to ask to get a sense of who's with us today and how you are approaching this topic of individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities that may have dementia in your program. You may not have people in your program, and that's perfectly fine. Let us know that too. But if you would just take a couple minutes, people are coming on, so I'm going to just kind of take a few seconds here. But to answer some of those poll questions. And with that, I am going to go to the next slide, but the poll will stay up. If you would also put in the chat box your name and the organization that you are with and what state you are from, that would be great too, so that we all have a sense of who's on the call today. And so let me just do a couple of housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and we're going to send a link to the webinar recording out to everyone who is registered today so that you will have it to refer back to if you would like to. We will also send a copy of the PowerPoint along with that at the same time. You are all muted by default. And if you have questions when we get to the end and we have question period, if we need to ask you follow-up questions or you want to elaborate on your question, we'll ask you to unmute at that time. When you have questions, this says a Q&A box because we normally do this in webinars, but we're doing it today in Zoom meeting. But if you have questions, put them in the chat box at any time. Helen's going to be looking at those. If it's something that seems to need to be addressed right away while we're on a particular slide, she should feel free to interrupt me and let me know there's a question. If it's something more general, we may hold that question until the end, but please put your questions in the chat box for us. And if you have any technical issues, go ahead and put those in the chat box too. Again, if you're just joining us, if you take just a minute to complete that poll that you see on the screen. There are copies of the presentation available. I did not put a QR code in for this, but I should have, but they will be sent out to you following the end of the webinar. And definitely want to take a moment to thank Special Olympics. They are providing the funding for the NTG's Changing Thinking project. We are in year 2 of what we hope will be a multi-year project. We have to reapply every year. We completed year 1 and are just starting year 2. We started year 2 on August 1st. So we want to be especially grateful for the support of Special Olympics in allowing us to do this project. And just briefly, this is me. I've been involved in the field of dementia for over 40 years, got my start when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Way back in 1981, he was only 56 years old at the time. I had never heard the word Alzheimer's, and that was a career change for me. Through taking care of him for 10 years at home, came to learn what a difficult journey this is for families. And so I made a shift in careers. I was with the Alzheimer's Association in Maine for about 20 years, had my own training and consulting company. And back in around 2008, started getting calls from group homes and IDD providers saying they had this aging population. They were recognizing that many of their clients were developing dementia of some form. And although they knew all about caring for people with IDD, caring for this aging population was something that was really quite new for them. And through that, it led me in trying to learn about that and how I could develop programming for them, led me to the NTG. I've been a member since 2011. And in 2020, we formally became our own 501c3 nonprofit. Prior to that, we were under the wing of the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry. We formed a board of directors. I was vice president for a couple of years and then accepted the position of chief operating officer in 2002. And I have to give a huge shout out to the NTG. I have never seen, I don't think, a volunteer organization, and we still are primarily all volunteer, who accomplishes as much as the NTG does in this field. It's really quite amazing. So we've got 3 goals today. I want to, show you what we are doing in our Changing Thinking project. Want to talk a little bit about the unique aspects of dementia for adults with IDD, and also mostly share NTG resources for you that I think can help you support your clients, your beneficiaries, to use the formal guide lingo, and your staff, and particularly the navigators that will be doing so much of that face-to-face work and interfacing with family members. I am going to end the poll with that. And let's just take a quick look at the results here. Most are saying no. We have small numbers, and I didn't expect everyone would be attending the webinar live today, because we know everyone has busy schedules, which is why we're going to record and share the recording. But kind of even split between yes and unsure, and the majority who did respond do not currently have someone. In terms of confidence, we have between neutral and very confident. I'm glad to see people feel very confident. And if you're neutral and just beginning to explore this area, hopefully, or unsure, and this is new territory, hopefully by the end today, we'll at least give you a sense of some resources and how maybe the NTG can be of help for you. Types of support or training. Practical tools for identifying dementia in people with IDD was a big one. Guidance on caregiver and family support, information on available community resources, and other. And you can put that other in the chat if you haven't already. And are you familiar with the NTG? We have a couple of folks who say very familiar. That's great. We appreciate that you've used our resources and are participating in our activities. Couple folks who've heard of us but don't know a whole lot. We're going to take care of that in a minute. And again, this is your first introduction, so welcome if this is your first introduction. So I am going to get rid of that screen for now so I can see my slides. With that, Helen, do you want to introduce yourself just briefly to the folks here? You're muted. Whoop, you've got to unmute yourself.
I was so careful to mute myself so that I wouldn't be interrupting. Good morning, everybody. Great to meet you and have you. I'm a former NTG board member and also am someone who spent my entire professional career of more than 40 years working in the disabilities field, both in the Finger Lakes region of New York, the Mohawk Valley region, and even the North Country. So I've been involved with the NTG for more than 10 years. And at this point, I'm working with the NTG, supporting their work on the Changing Thinking project. So as we talked this morning, and this is Catherine's presentation, if there are specific questions related to the project, Catherine and I are both happy to field those. Other than that, I'm going to monitor the chat and make sure we can address questions that you may have. So as Catherine said, please, if you have questions, just enter them in the chat and we will do our best to answer those. Thanks.
And feel free to jump in at any point, Helen, if you think of something that I have left out or that you think needs elaborating on. Don't be shy, jump in. This is a team activity today.
Okay.
So let me just tell you a little bit about the NTG, just a little bit of background. We were formed in approximately 2010 by Dr. Matthew Janicki and Dr. Seth Keller. Dr. Keller's a neurologist. Dr. Janicki has had a long career working in the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities in the PhD realm of doctorhood. And they really formed it in recognition of the fact that when we talk about dementia, we generally think and talk about people in the general or the neurotypical population. We see the ads on TV, we see, the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Foundation, and others. And when we talk about them, we tend to think about the general population. And we sometimes fail to recognize that there are other underserved populations, many of which have very unique care needs and challenges. And today we're here to talk about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, many of whom, particularly people with Down syndrome, have very serious challenges in accessing healthcare generally. And again, particularly in the case of people with Down syndrome, have a greatly increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease or another related form of dementia. So the NTG was created to really be a voice for people with intellectual disabilities and their caregivers, for folks who are at risk of or who have developed already some form of Alzheimer's or a related dementia, and wanted to raise awareness of their needs while at the same time being a source of reliable information and education on their unique needs. And we do this in a number of ways, very active in advocating for inclusive federal policies. Dr. Janicki served on the National Alzheimer's Project, the acronym is NAPA, N-A-P-A Council, and has been involved in many, many federal initiatives over the years to raise awareness of the needs of people with IDD and dementia. We publish guides and white papers and all sorts of consensus documents. We do in-person and online trainings for professional staff and family caregivers. We do them around the country. We work very closely with a number of other national organizations, and I don't want to name names only because I'm afraid I will leave someone out if I do, but you would recognize them all, to advance research and policy change, and also, again, that educational component. And we also support families. We have a monthly online family support group, which I'll give you some information on a little bit further along. But I would invite you to visit our website. That QR code on the left is our general website. And on the right-hand side is the page that is specific to the Changing Thinking Project. There's a lot of information on our website generally for professionals as well as family members. And also on the Changing Thinking page specific to this project, but really would encourage you, when you have a minute, take a look at those two pages, particularly the general website, because you will probably find that there's a wealth of information there that could be beneficial to you. Specific to this project, again, as I said, it's called Changing Thinking. And I think that our overall mission is particularly relevant to the GUIDE program specifically. We recognize that there are many GUIDE participants who may have people with intellectual or developmental disabilities in their caseloads, and many of you, and perhaps more, who don't, but may be thinking about how you could potentially include and care for those individuals in your caseload. So we wanted to create some resources that would be specifically tailored to guide healthcare providers and guide navigators, and provide guidance on how can you support these individuals, given that they oftentimes, in terms of healthcare providers, have very unique presentations of their dementia. Family caregivers have unique needs, many of whom have been providing care for a lifelong individual over the course of that individual's life, as opposed to in the general population where it tends to be a spouse or another family member, a parent who develops a form of dementia, and you take on that caregiving role later on in your life. And for this population, those caregivers have by and large been providing care throughout their entire lives for this individual. And oftentimes they're aging themselves and have challenges of their own medical conditions that they're dealing with on top of their caregiving for an adult child. There are also differences between the aging network of support services and that are offered through the disability network as opposed to the aging network. And that's another aspect of this that we are working on. And I'll tell you in a minute about a resource for learning more about that. But we realize that many of you may not be familiar with some of those differences and how do you access information to kind of bone up on those differences and increase your knowledge so that you can support these individuals. And in a couple of minutes here, I'm going to be very specific in terms of the resources that we'll offer you. Again, but specifically to GUIDE, as you all know, because you were involved in the project, the goal is to improve the quality of care for people living with dementia and their family caregivers. And it does this by offering coordinated, person-centered model of care, bridging the medical, social, and community supports. And care coordination, respite is available, caregiver support and education, 24 access to support, valuable resources for all families. But I think they can also offer and maybe fill in some blanks for family caregivers of individuals with IDD and offer them some benefits that they may not be able to access through disability providers and the disability support network. So we applaud you, those that indicated that you are already providing services to folks in GUIDE. And I want to just quickly kind of shift gears a little bit as to, why this matters. Good news is people with intellectual disabilities are living longer. That's thanks to advances in healthcare, earlier intervention, education, community inclusion. Many people are now living into their 60s and 70s. That was an age range that was rare at one time for this population. So while this is a really remarkable and wonderful achievement, reflecting decades of progress in medical care and social support, it also brings new challenges with it, such as a higher risk for age-related health conditions, including dementia. And as individuals with intellectual disabilities age, making sure they have access to appropriate healthcare services, aging services, and dementia-capable support systems is really essential to maintain quality of life for the individual and also to support those caregivers, because I'm sure many of you have been caregivers yourselves for family members, and caregivers are the foundation of long-term care and disability services throughout the country. I want to address that increased life expectancy just a little bit more and do it so particularly for people with Down syndrome. Back in 1930, as you can see on this chart, the average life expectancy was only about the age of 30. 50 years later, by 1983, it was up to 25 years. Today, the average life expectancy can be between 50 and 60 years of age, and even a little bit more. And that's thanks to those advances in cardiac surgery and general health management. People with Down syndrome used to die from cardiac conditions and infections. Big advances in that is increased life expectancy. So while that's a great thing, it is, again, that double-edged sword. People with Down syndrome, they're living long enough now that Alzheimer's disease specifically is a real and present risk for them, and one that really does threaten their continued increases in their life expectancy. Many of you already know this, but people with Down syndrome do have a greatly increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and that's because of how their genes are structured. Most people, you and I, have 2 copies of every chromosome, but individuals with Down syndrome have 3 copies of chromosome 21 specifically. And that's the chromosome that carries a gene that produces amyloid precursor protein. You've probably seen it referred to as APP as an acronym. And when you have an extra copy of this gene, it leads to higher levels of that amyloid protein in the brain. And it's that protein that clumps together and forms those plaques that you've heard of. We talk about Alzheimer's and plaques and tangles. It's that protein that clumps together, it forms those plaques, and that's the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. For people with Down syndrome, by the age of 40, almost all people will show that Alzheimer's pathology in their brain. Now, that doesn't mean they've developed symptoms, clinical symptoms by the age of 40, but they will show that pathology in their brain. But by the time they get into their 50s, a very large percentage, and depending on what study you look at, the rates vary, but the most consistently reported rate I have seen is that by mid 50s, 80 to 90% of people with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's disease, the clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Now, if you compare that to the general population, that's usually, Alzheimer's usually affects people over the age of 65. So quite an age difference there. Some of that is related to accelerated aging that occurs with people with Down syndrome. For someone who's 50 years old with Down syndrome, their body physiologically looks much more like someone who's 15 to 20 years older. So that 50-year-old, although externally may look like someone who's 50, their body systems look more like someone who's actually 65 or 70 years old. Alzheimer's disease also presents differently in people with Down syndrome. In the general population, we see short-term memory impairment as being the presenting sign for most people. That's certainly what we saw with my dad, that asking the same question over and over again. But for people with Down syndrome, it's a little different. One of the things we find that can potentially be a sign of onset of Alzheimer's disease in someone with Down syndrome is the onset of seizures. They may never have had seizures before, and now they're starting to have seizures, or perhaps those seizures have been controlled, and they're now having more difficulty controlling those seizures. So seizure onset can be one kind of red flag specifically for people with Down syndrome. Also, changes in personality, not wanting to partake of activities that they used to enjoy being involved in, being more withdrawn, having trouble with previously learned skills. So we tend to see those things more with people in Down syndrome as opposed to those short-term memory changes that we expect in the general population. It's also more difficult to assess the change in cognitive function in people with Down syndrome. Most dementia screening tools, and you think of the mini mental status exam or the Montreal, or there's a whole bunch of them. Those are designed for people in the general population, and those are the tests that ask for things like count back from 100 by sevens, draw the clock face. Going to tell you 3 words. We'll talk about something else, and then I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to repeat those 3 words for us. Those are all for people in the general population, and they rely on a certain level of verbal ability and educational attainment. And people with IDD generally, and in this case, we're talking specifically people with Down syndrome, may not have those verbal communication skills. If you've never been able to count back from 100 by sevens, your score is going to be automatically low. If you've never been able to draw a clock face, that's going to be a problem. So those tools are not generally recommended for people with IDD generally, or again, we're talking people with Down syndrome here. There are some specialized tools such as what's called the NTG-EDSD, that stands for Early Detection Screen for Dementia, that are better suited. They are widely used in the disability community around the country, but not as well known among people who provide dementia services and healthcare providers in the sort of more general population. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the EDSD in just a minute. So hold that thought for just a minute. I think, the other thing is there are very few physicians anywhere in the country that specialize in the regular medical healthcare needs for people with ID, and even fewer that specialize in understanding how dementia may present in this population and how to manage that condition in this population. We need more. So we're thrilled that you're with us today. That to me is an indication of your interest and your support for this population. There's also this thing called diagnostic overshadowing, and that's attributing symptoms to a pre-existing condition rather than a potentially comorbid condition. And we see this a lot for this population. Oftentimes, as people age, their family members, their professional caregivers will note a change in their ability to function. And it sometimes gets written off as being, well, that's their underlying disability, when in fact, potentially, it could signal that there might be the onset of some form of dementia. Now, you wouldn't want to jump to that conclusion automatically and assume just because this is someone in their 50s and they have Down syndrome that it's the onset of Alzheimer's disease. You absolutely positively need to do a thorough differential diagnosis, rule out any other underlying medical conditions that can present with those same symptoms. But this is a really large issue for this population. And so if you want to read more on this topic, that QR code there will take you to an article that you may find very useful. So let me turn specifically to tools and resources. And I'm going to talk first about that EDSD that I'd mentioned just a minute ago. And Helen, do we have anything that needs to be responded to right at the moment? You're muted, but I'm going to assume that was a no.
I was going to say, no questions at this time. What a great cross section of participants that are with us today. And it's great to have that cross section of individuals from different parts of the country. The one comment I just was going to add is that when I look at where our participants are from, there's going to be a range of both services that are available and the level of expertise that's available, depending on whether you're in a metropolitan area, a progressive, very broadly supported health community, or whether you're in a very rural area. So those are some of the things, and that's where the resources that Catherine is about to share are going to be so helpful, we hope, to all of you.
Thanks. Excellent point. So EDSD, early detection screen for dementia. Now, I have to make a caveat. That title sort of in some way sounds like this is a diagnostic tool for diagnosing dementia, and it's not. This is a screening tool. It's an administrative tool. The beauty of this tool is that you don't need any clinical expertise to complete this form. It's a wonderfully intuitive and very visual tool. It was created by the NTG back, and it was one of the first things the NTG undertook back in 2010, 2011. Dr. Lucille Ezralou, some of you may recognize that name, co-chaired a committee of experts who developed this. It was based on a couple of other tools that were in existence called the D-Squid. And it really has come into very widespread use in the intervening years. Many, many healthcare providers who work with this population use it. Service providers use it. And it's used internationally, actually, as well. And what it does is it gives you an opportunity to, at least on an annual basis, and we recommend this be done at least annually if it's someone with Down syndrome, starting at least at the age of 40, but you could certainly start at an earlier age, start wherever the person is. Or if it's someone with a form of ID other than Down syndrome, at least at the age of 50, but again, you can start at any age. And what it does is, as you walk through this, and it's several pages, the first time you do it, it might take you a little bit longer to complete it. It might take you 45. It could even take you 60 minutes to complete. But subsequent times you do it, it isn't going to take you as long. So it's not terribly time intensive. We do recommend that whoever knows the person best be the individual to complete the form. And it's going to pick up on the individual's health status now compared to a year ago, activities of daily living and how they're able to perform those. Have there been any changes in behavior, memory changes? If the individual is able to self-report any problems they may say they think they're having. It's available in multiple languages. And the other beauty of it is it's free. You can download it from our website. There is an electronic version of it on the website. And we suggest that this is a great tool to take with the individual when they're going to a physician's appointment. When you start noting that there may be some changes, take this tool with them when they go to their healthcare provider. It's a very visual tool. I think of a physician in a very rural area of Maine whose only healthcare providers were general practitioners. And he reported to me many years ago that the physicians in his part of the state, again, very extremely rural, almost up on the Canadian border, loved the EDSD because oftentimes the person who transports the individual for these physician's appointments is not the person who's most familiar with them. And so the physician reported to him that they could look at this and see very quickly why the individual was sitting in front of them on any given day, what changes had occurred. So they knew right away without having to ask multiple questions of an individual who probably didn't know the answers to those questions because they were only doing the transport, and help them really save a lot of time. And as we all know these days, our time sitting in front of the doctor is limited. Now, I'm slipping here to webinars because following up on the EDSD, we have a free webinar coming up on Monday, November 17th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And depending on where you are across the country, those times are listed there. And Dr. Ezralou, who, as I mentioned a minute ago, who co-chaired the committee to develop the EDSD, is going to be providing a more in-depth tutorial on how to actually use the EDSD and capture those observations of change. And so if you are interested in using the EDSD and would like more information and a more in-depth take on how this might be something that's useful to you, we would love to have you join the webinar. You do need to register for it. It will be recorded. If that's a night or an evening or a time that you can't attend in person, please register anyway, because we will be recording it. We'll make sure that everyone who's registered will receive a link to the recording afterwards, and we would love to have you take part in that. We also have a YouTube channel, and we are starting to post webinars that we have done. We are doing more webinars in the coming year, but we have a couple from our first year of the project there. We had one that was in May for family members. It was an introduction to the Guide program and how it might be of benefit to them and what the eligibility criteria are. And we also had one in June. I got to move my little things here because it's blocking my view. June, if I remember correctly, that was more for healthcare practitioners. And again, would invite you, and I'll be sending you all the links to this when I send out the follow-up email with the recording link. But again, another way for you to sort of get some more in-depth information. And we will be adding to these webinars. We have a number of them coming up that are in the planning stages currently, keeping Helen busy there with the planning of them. And so we will make sure we now have your email addresses when we do have upcoming webinars. We'll make sure you get notified of those. And also, if you can't attend live, as always, get your links so you can watch the recording afterwards at your leisure. For those of you who may be interested in some of the new therapeutics and new treatments and testing that is available, you've probably heard about it in the media. These are drugs like donanemab, Leqembi. You've probably heard about, testing PET scans and how those are being used now, and blood tests to help diagnose for Alzheimer's. We did have a webinar with a very robust panel of experts. And that is posted on our YouTube channel as well. We'll get you the link for that. But if you're interested in some of those newer therapies and testings, protocols that are coming out, we would invite you to watch that as well. It was an excellent webinar, incredibly informative, and will bring you up to date, specifically as to how we also had an ethicist that was part of that panel and addressed, the ethics of clinical trials and enrolling people with Down syndrome specifically in clinical trials and the ethics around that. So I think you might find that very interesting. We also have, and we're very excited about this, this is what we spent all of our first year working on. And it's a new self-paced course, and it's designed specifically for guide navigators and care teams. And again, there's the QR code. You can snap it quickly. But as I go to the next page, again, we will make sure you get the links for this. This is a free course, and it was designed specifically to help guide navigators understanding those unique aging and dementia challenges that are very specific to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There were 3 units. I'll show you what those are in a minute. This is free. And navigators will get a certificate of completion. After they complete it, each of the units is maybe an hour, 45 minutes. Some people have done it in 30 minutes when we were piloting it. And let me show you what they are. And again, I got to move I should just minimize those, get those out of the way. Module 1 talks about dementia in adults with ID. How do you recognize it? How do you interpret some of those changes in functioning that you may be seeing? Also goes to that issue of diagnostic overshadowing, which is so prevalent for this population and can be so detrimental to individuals with ID. Goes into a little bit of detail on screening tools, eligibility requirements, strategies for developing person-centered care plans. And so kind of a good overview of the sort of basics, differences between intellectual and developmental disabilities and so forth. Module 2 talks specifically about the unique needs of family caregivers of aging adults with ID and dementia. What are their care needs? How do they differ from the general population? How do you help them? How do you come up with care plans for them? Align resources, and provide that comprehensive support that's at the heart of the guide program. And finally, the 3rd module goes to the issue of the differences between services that you may be familiar with in the aging network and those in the disability network, the eligibility requirements. If you think it's complex in the aging network, it's probably even more complex in the disability network. Not insurmountable, but it is different. What are the different agencies that may have resources for your clients? How do you link beneficiaries and caregivers to those supports? And so again, this is free, and a certificate of completion will be awarded to navigators. And it's open to enroll and to start taking those modules, and we think you'll find them very helpful. We did pilot it with some navigators, and the navigators that did partake in that pilot did find the information very useful and very helpful to them in their work. We also have some advisories, and there's lots of them, and I'm not going to tell you what each one of them is, but this is more in-depth information. They were developed by Dr. Janicki. They have more of a, I guess I'd call it policy bent to them. But if you want more in-depth information in any of these areas, we would invite you to look at them. We have more on the next page. Navigator education, caregivers, partner services. And then these are the care component. This is a toolkit developed by the Gerontological Society of America. It was originally The original version was for people in the neurotypical population. The NTG worked with them to come up with another component for the ID population with dementia specifically. This could be a really good tool, not only for healthcare practitioners, but navigators as well, and anyone who is looking at addressing the needs of adults with IDD and dementia. And this is available by following that QR code. The advisory it's also available on the GSA website, and I will make sure to include a link to the actual CARE toolkit when I send out the follow-up email. And there's one that is not posted yet, number 25-2. And then we have one specific to autism, which again, another aging cohort of people with IDD. As you may know, the first people who were formally diagnosed with autism were diagnosed in the mid-1940s. They are now reaching that age of risk for developing dementia. They're in their 70s. And very much like with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy and other forms of ID, when we think of autism and those other forms of ID and research, we tend to think of children. And that's where most of the research has been focused on over the years. Not much going on research-wise in terms of the aging population. But if you want to know what is known about it, I would direct you to this advisory, as well as another publication on our website. And I will make sure to put that into the follow-up email as well, if this is a population that you have particular interest in. So with that, I am going to ask for questions. And I also have one last little poll that I'm going to ask that you would do. Hang on just a minute, because it's not. Let me. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to stop sharing the slides and find out why it's not letting me open this other poll here. I love technology when it works right. And for some reason, it doesn't want to let me open the other poll. And I don't know why. Had this happen once before in a webinar, and I never did figure out why that was. But, oh, wait a minute, here we go. I got it. There we go. Helen, is it showing up on your end?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, great. So if you just take a minute, this will help, this one question will help us think about, future programming for you and, topics that you might like to see us do webinars on in the future, or provide advisories or tools or whatever. I will also say, when we do end this webinar, you're going to see a final survey pop up in a separate browser window. That's kind of your general post-webinar evaluation survey. But we would really appreciate it if you just take a minute, just a few questions, let us know how we did today. As you all know, if you've been involved in grants, funders love to get information on how their money was being spent and was it being well spent. So we would love to get that from you. So if you could just take a minute at the end when we close out of this, we would be eternally grateful for that. So Helen, do we have questions while folks are working on the poll too?
I was going to say, we have a comment from Ivanova Smith, who said that they would like to hear more from people with lived experience and ways we can preserve people's rights when diagnosis happens. One of the things, just a comment.
Funny, that topic should come up.
That we were in a meeting earlier this week where the point of living with dementia needs to focus on how we live and how we support a person's quality of life, with them in the driver's seat of their choices to the degree that they are able for as long as possible. So that's a really important topic and something that for a future webinar, we are looking ahead at our 2026 webinar planning, one of them being to really include individuals themselves and having them share their life stories of how they are both advocating for their own health as well as how their family caregivers and those who are important in their life may not be a family member, may be a trusted friend, neighbor, or direct support staff that's part of their everyday life in the setting where they live, how they are supporting them being able to live the life they want to live as long as possible, regardless of whether or not there may be a diagnosis of dementia. So, great point.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for that.
We're on the same wavelength. That
Yes.
we don't hear enough from people with lived experience. So I appreciate your sharing that comment. Any other comments or questions in there, Helen?
No other questions that have appeared yet. I just also wanted to say an earlier comment was when we were talking about how the life expectancy of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities has changed and really extended over these last couple of decades. The point about the important role of community-based resources having expanded in light of the deinstitutionalization movement is something that really we need to remember. Such progress has been made post-Willowbrook, post the tremendous changes that happened in the 70s and 80s that are part of telling this story. So that was simply a comment that was made and that I wanted to share with the group. Yeah.
Thank you. I do notice in the poll, recognizing and screening for dementia in people with IDD was one of the top issues. And we will be sure and pass that information on. We do have some webinars coming specifically for healthcare practitioners, and we will be sure to pass that on. Dr. Keller, Seth Keller, who's co-president of the NTG, is working with that group, and we'll make sure that they get that feedback. And I think that's something that arises a lot. We hear a lot. And so we will make sure that they get that request. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if they were to do something on that topic.
Well,
so
I was going to say wherever you are in your level of interest and involvement when it comes to capturing change and function, looking at screening and assessing to track change. The EDSD webinar on November 17th is something for those of you who are really wanting to become more familiar with the EDSD as a tool to capture change with a person who has an intellectual or developmental disability. In 2026, there will be a webinar that is going to focus on diagnostic assessment itself. And again, while the target audience is physicians, nurse practitioners, people who will be in a position of actual diagnosis, it would be open to others who are part of the care team. And so, because it's just as important to understand what are the components that need to be considered with diagnosis. So whether you are a navigator, a case manager, a care manager, whatever your role may be as part of a care team, or a family member who really wants to make sure that the correct comprehensive assessment is being conducted in order to arrive at a diagnosis. That seminar will be coming up in 2026, and having been on this webinar, you will be on our email mailing list to be made aware of these upcoming webinars that may be of interest to you.
And I wanted to just put up quickly our email addresses there because I realized I had maybe taken them down a bit too quickly. If you have questions after we sign off here, Helen and I would welcome you reaching out to us. I will make sure to include those in the follow-up email as well. If you have questions you think of after the fact about today that you didn't think to ask, please don't hesitate to reach out. or moving forward. If you have questions, suggestions, comments, feedback, we, on any aspect of intellectual developmental disabilities and dementia, that we may be able to help you with through our project here at Guide, or just general questions that you may have, please reach out to us. We want to be there for you. We want to try and support you. So don't be shy. We welcome that interaction. Helen, any last, I'll let you have the last word. I just want to thank people for taking the time today. Thank you all for what you're doing. And, together we can change, healthcare for this population and provide more access. So thank you for all you're doing. Helen, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, just, healthcare leadership for all of you who are on this, and you don't need a title to be a leader. Leaders come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. You may be a family caregiver, you may be a parent, you may be a sibling, you may be a staff member, you may be an administrator, or you may be a clinician, and all of the above. All of those encompasses. But change is going to come from each of us advocating from where we are and beginning to really bridge the silos that certainly have existed between healthcare systems, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and community-based resources. We really want to really strengthen those to have a seamless transition and collaboration across those silos. There's some amazing work being done by people who are on this webinar today that I recognize. So we want to share best practices, and we are really confident that we're moving in the right direction. And thank you for your interest in this really important topic.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to give you back about 8 minutes of your day. I'm sure no one will object to that. Thank you. We look forward to hopefully seeing you again in the future on another webinar. And take care and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.